This is an amazing story that I'm going to share with you this afternoon, and to have the museum embrace it is extremely gratifying. This is a story, as I mentioned, with relevance today. A story about the best of humanity during the worst of times. A story about a man relegated to an undeserved obscurity. This is former Colorado Governor Ralph Carr's story. He was a man in 1942 who said unapologetically, "If I do not speak the feeling of the people of Colorado in my office as governor, then I haven't any right to be there." At the time, he was standing up for the constitutional rights of Japanese Americans, and that stand against ignorance and against bigotry would cost him his career. You all are going to be very thankful to know that I am embracing Governor Carr's preeminent rule to speech making, which is never outspeak the bladder capacity of your audience. There's a lot of iced tea out there, so I'm going to be cognizant as to how long I go, because it's certainly a thought-provoking topic, and if I don't have time for questions here in this, I'm going to be right outside, and I'll have time afterwards. As George mentioned, my day job is as a reporter at the NBC affiliate here in Denver, KUSA. And I've long said that the best part about my job as a reporter is that I meet extraordinary people who describe themselves as ordinary. And in my opinion, it makes them even more extraordinary. Maybe it's the woman with 3 prosthetic limbs who comes down to the state capitol to lobby lawmakers so others with prosthetics have better insurance coverage. Maybe it's the couple who fosters 250 children, adopts 10, and when asked why, simply says, well, somebody had to. Or maybe it's the 30-something couple that eschews lucrative IT careers to open up a cafe just down the street on Colfax Avenue called The Same Cafe, so all may eat, where you only pay if you can afford it. Extraordinary people who describe themselves as ordinary. In September 1950, Colorado in this country lost one of those extraordinary people, a man who I have come to know over the last 6 years, immersing myself in pretty much every word ever written about him, every word ever written by him. And I stand here today believing that Ralph Carr is more extraordinary than I believed the very first day that I met him in a figurative sense back in January of 2002. At that time, I was doing a story on a proposed bill in the Colorado State Legislature that was introduced to make Governor Carr's birthday a voluntary state holiday. I met at the state capitol a tour guide by the name of Carol Keller, and she had a small group in tow, and she was standing outside the governor's office on the first floor of our state capitol, where there's a plaque honoring Governor Carr. And she spoke about a man of conviction, of dedication, and of principle. The week Ralph Carr died in 1950, Colorado's poet laureate Thomas Hornsby Farrell wrote the following: "Ralph Carr was a one-man crusade for freedom all of his life. I've heard it said," he wrote, "that Ralph Carr could have gone down as a great American, known to everybody in every state, if he'd simply been willing to wangle more of the brakes his way and be less bullheaded about standing up for the constitutional rights of the underdogs." Well, Thomas Hornsby Farrell believed they can have their definition of what a great American is. But it seems to me, he wrote, that if we had more men like Ralph Carr along the line, we wouldn't need to keep puffing up so many other great men to bail us out. Over the course of this talk, we will look at why Ralph Carr has been forgotten, and even more importantly, in my opinion, why he needs to be remembered. Now, it was known in 1939 that the governor of Colorado had a temper, the kind that would make even the best of his friends cringe. No politician was too big, no businessman too powerful to escape his wrath. To give you an example, his friends used to talk about a time after a football game at the University of Denver, back when they had football at the University of Denver. And the line of cars to leave the parking lot went on seemingly forever after the game. And when it finally came time for Governor Carr's car to move, someone cut him off. Now, Governor Carr was an impatient man by nature. A wasted minute was a wasted opportunity. So it should come as no surprise to you when you combine a temper with impatience that you end up with 1940s road rage. "You son of a bitch," the governor yells out of his own car window. It's the governor, mind you. Well, the other driver was a large, hulking man who jumps out of his car to confront the man who had just cursed him. Governor Carr doesn't hesitate, all 5'8.5" of him. He jumps out of his car, runs right up to the man and says, "I called you by your right name, didn't I?" Now, the larger driver, maybe he recognized Governor Carr or the state patrol officer that was likely standing behind him. He demurred, got back into his car. Governor Carr waved, smiled, meanwhile, and went on his way. On February 19th, 1942, Ralph Carr's staff was witnessing one of those eruptions, and it was not over anything trivial at all. It was an eruption directed squarely at President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The governor was pacing, clenching in his fist a telegram announcing Executive Order 9066, which starts out, as you all know, whereas the successful prosecution of the war requires every possible protection against espionage and against sabotage to national defense material, national defense premises, and national defense utilities. Governor Carr paused before reading aloud what he believed to be the most onerous sentence of all. "I hereby authorize," President Roosevelt wrote, "and direct the Secretary of War and the military commanders whom he may from time to time designate to prescribe military areas in such places from which any or all persons may be excluded." Now, Ralph Carr knew when you got past the formality of the language, this was a de facto declaration of martial law on the West Coast with one not well-hidden agenda, and that was to remove anyone of Japanese descent. His eyes flashed, and the anger in Ralph Carr's voice was apparent. "Now that's wrong," he shouted at his staff. "Some of these Japanese are citizens of the United States. And in case they had missed that fact, they're American citizens," he shouted again. In our recent past, we look at the events of 9/11 as really a seminal moment in our history. And the shock and the fear and the anger that we all felt afterwards is still palpable in many of us today. Yet I believe it paled in comparison to what happened after Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. The thousands of postcards, notes, and telegrams sitting in Governor Carr's collection at the Colorado State Archives did not need to have been written in all capital letters or have exclamation points at the end of every sentence to literally scream off of the page at you. They came from homemakers and businessmen, from eastern Colorado and western Colorado, from big cities and small towns. There was a fear that was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, a raw emotion